at the far edge of the Savannah wilderness, where the sun kisses every blade of grass, and the wind whispers tales in a language only the ancient trees remember. There is a story people still pass around. Not about a vicious beast, not exactly about a hero either, but about a promise. That was never forgotten. His name was Logan, a ranger once respected by the entire Savannah Reserve, until one day he was accused of a crime he swore he never committed. No one believed him, no one, except for a lion. Zuberi. That name, if you've ever lived out here, you've definitely heard it. Not because he was the most fearsome predator, but because he was unlike any other lion. They say Zuberi had a long scar across his forehead. They say he lived alone, without a pride. And they say he once bowed his head to a human being. But few truly know. The bond between Logan and Zuberi began with a single cry in the dry woods on that fateful day, when man and beast looked at each other, not with fear, but with trust. The dry season in the savannah was a brutal test of endurance. The wind burned hot, the earth cracked wide open, and the grass, dry as tinder, just waiting to catch fire. Logan had patrolled these woods hundreds of times, but that morning, something felt off. Not because it was quiet, but because that silence wasn't natural. Among the low thorn bushes, he heard a sound, faint, broken, like a stifled gasp trying to stay hidden. It wasn't an antelope, it wasn't a vulture, it was a cry. Logan crouched low, stepped carefully through the thick grass, and then he saw it. A small creature, shaking, collapsed inside a crude trap made of rusty wire, a lion cub, skin and bones, its hind leg swollen and purple from the tight metal coils, eyes wide open, not with rage, but with panic. No mother, no pride, just a fragile life, slipping closer to death. Logan froze. Sweat pooled in his palms under the scorching sun. This was not in any ranger protocol. He could walk away, and technically he'd be right. File the report, call for rescue, stay uninvolved, but if he did that, by noon, all that would remain would be a dried-up corpse in the grass. Logan knelt down, took off his outer shirt, gently draped it over the tiny animal. His fingers worked the wire loose, one loop at a time. Blood soaked his hands, but Zuberi didn't claw, didn't growl. He just gasped and looked at him. No words, just a gaze, as if he had known Logan forever. And so Logan did the unthinkable. Something that would never appear in his career record. He lifted the creature in his arms and carried it back to base, defying every regulation. But what he didn't know was that this friendship wouldn't just save a lion. One day, it would save him in a way no one could ever imagine. Zuberi healed slowly, but he never whimpered. No cries, no resistance, just that steady gaze, like he was born to survive. Logan let him sleep just outside the hut, at first keeping distance, then getting used to the scent. And one day, Zuberi no longer lay by the porch. He rested his head right at Logan's feet during every single night patrol. The lion cub grew up to the sound of a crackling old radio, the smell of morning coffee, and a series of very specific trainings, running side by side with horses, staying perfectly still at sudden noises, never charging into a herd, but never backing down when danger drew near. Once, a wild buffalo appeared suddenly on the trail. Logan didn't even have time to react. before Zuberi lunged forward, stood his ground, and let out a roar that forced the beast to turn away. No leash, no command, just trust, etched in blood and time. People at the station started joking. They called Logan the man guarded by a lion. They laughed. But deep in their eyes, there was something else. Caution. Among them, Marcus laughed the least. A veteran ranger. He'd dreamed of working with the big predators. But now, everyone was watching Logan. And that strange little pet of his. Marcus started whispering. If a lion becomes that close to a man, is it still a lion? Or is Logan raising a dangerous toy to cover something up? Logan heard, but he didn't respond. He believed he and Zuberi had nothing to prove. Until one early morning. Logan woke up, and Zuberi was gone. A cold knot twisted in his gut. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And then he saw it. A faint trail of blood on the cracked, dry ground. Could this be the turning point in his already cursed life? And Zuberi? What had happened to him? My dear friend, take a bite of your cake, sip your tea, and stay with me, because the most thrilling parts of this tale are just around the corner. Logan ran across the entire station, calling out, voice cracking, into the empty wind. Zuberi wasn't at the hut, not by the familiar stream, not at their favorite hilltop where they watched the sunset. All that remained was a single drop of dried blood and a leather strap, cut clean in half. That afternoon, Logan returned to his cabin to grab a map. He was going to search the deeper parts of the forest. But the door had been broken open, the lock smashed. Inside, two unfamiliar rangers were tearing through his belongings. Marcus stepped forward, holding a small cloth bag in his hand. "We just found this under your floorboards," he said. "Care to explain, Logan?" Inside the bag, two dried rhino horns, caked with blood and mud. One of them still bore the official seal of the reserve, proof that it came from internal inventory. "No, they're not mine," Logan choked out, his voice trembling. The entire outpost circled around him, silent. No one met his eyes. Not a single voice spoke in his defense. The director of the reserve ordered his badge stripped, his cabin sealed, and Logan exiled. That very night. No trial, no second check, no due process. Just a bag of horns and a few whispered words. And that was enough to erase 7 years of loyalty. Gone. There was no trial, no chance to defend himself. No one asked a single question. Logan just disappeared. He left Savannah like a name scratched off the map. No badge, no weapon, no fellow rangers. Only an old, worn bag over his shoulder, and a tiny lion's tooth tied with a leather string. The last thing left from Zuberi. For 10 years, Logan lived in a remote southern town. He worked at a small wildlife rescue center, teaching kids how to bandage injured owls and fix the broken claw of a porcupine. He barely spoke. No one knew he had once been a ranger, and he never told them. Each night, he'd write a few lines in his journal, then burn the pages. Not because he feared exposure, but because he couldn't bear to keep memories that would never come back. Sometimes, he dreamed of Zuberi, not as a cub, but grown, standing in a field of scorched grass, his mane wild in the wind, looking at Logan. No growl, no charge, just a stare, as if to say, I'm still here. For 10 long years, Logan lived on the edge of memory, until one day, while fixing a shelter for an injured badger, the radio crackled with breaking news. Savannah Wildlife Reserve is investigating a string of wild animal incidents near residential areas. The suspected cause, a solitary male lion with a long scar across his forehead. It doesn't belong to any pride. It doesn't roam randomly. It appears to be patrolling an old boundary. Logan dropped the hammer onto the dirt floor. He didn't speak. He didn't even breathe hard. He just sat down and gripped the lion's tooth in his pocket, as if holding on to a promise he'd been waiting 10 years to keep. Zuberi was alive, and if he was still guarding their old boundary, then maybe, just maybe, Zuberi was still waiting for the only soul he ever trusted to come back. Savannah. After 10 years, it was still the place where the ground burned like coal and the sky hung open, like an old fairy tale door left ajar. The grass rose higher than your knees, the scent of heat, tangled with wilderness. But when Logan stepped down from that dusty, beaten truck, everything had changed. Not the landscape, but him. He was no longer the man he used to be. This time he returned with a documentary crew, curious people, chasing the tale of the man who once lived with a lion. They were the ones who secured the special permit that allowed him back into the reserve. Logan said little. He just quietly strapped on his old backpack and carried the lion's tooth he'd held onto for a decade. That first afternoon, as the crew paused to set up their gear, Logan drifted away. Unnoticed, his feet instinctively found the old path, the familiar bend in the forest, the red clay slope he used to walk each morning with Zuberi. And then, between the swaying grass, moved by the wind, a figure emerged, tall, maned, the scar across his forehead etched as deep as a carving on ancient stone. Zuberi. Logan didn't dare step closer, didn't call out. He just stood there, breathed deeply. Zuberi looked at him. No growl, no lowering of the head, just a look. It wasn't the gaze of a wild beast meeting a man, not caution, not instinct. It was the look of memory, of a promise, never broken. Logan lifted his hand, not to signal, but to greet. A piece of his own soul. Zuberi didn't move, didn't rush forward, but he didn't walk away either. He slowly turned and began to step back into the forest, as if to say, "You've returned, but it's not over yet." Logan turned to head back toward the film crew, but something made him pause. A tiny, nagging detail. The only person who had disappeared from sight earlier was Marcus, and that sound was no coincidence. From the moment their eyes met, Logan knew. Zuberi had never left Savannah. He had simply learned how to survive in a place where trust no longer existed. That night, while the crew rested at a newly built research station, Logan couldn't sleep. He sat alone with an old map, marking every spot where Zuberi had appeared. And then he saw it. They formed a perfect boundary around the restricted zone, a section sealed off for years. He turned to the crew leader and asked, "Who approved this filming trip?" The man hesitated. "Someone named Marcus. Used to work here long ago. He seemed to know the area really well, so we asked him to guide us." Logan's chest turned to ice. Not because of the name, but because what he thought had been buried 10 years ago had never truly gone away. The next night, Logan slipped away from camp. He carried a shoulder-mounted camera and his old radio. He followed fresh paw prints deep into the forest, to an old wooden hut only the veterans of the reserve would know. And there, he saw something worse than anything that had ever ruined his life. Inside the hut, a black market storage room. Ivory, rhino horn, leopard skin, sorted, catalogued, logged for shipment. And in the corner, a delivery logbook with a fresh signature at the bottom. Marcus A. Blythe. As Logan recorded with the camera strapped to his shoulder, a voice rang out behind him. "You know, I almost regretted letting you live." Marcus. He stepped from the shadows, gun in hand, face bare. No more masks, no rage, just the cold stillness of a man who knows. The truth has been touched. "This time," Marcus said, "you're not walking out of this forest." Logan didn't flinch. He knew. There were no words that could stop a man who had chosen to become a monster. But Marcus never got the chance to take another step. Because a deep, low growl rose behind him, like thunder from the earth itself. From the high ridge, Zuberi stepped out. He didn't charge. He didn't roar like any other lion. He just stood there, between Logan and Marcus, back straight, mane rippling in the breeze, and eyes like unsheathed swords, without needing to swing. Marcus stepped back, not out of fear of claws, but because that stare made his soul bleed. His gun fell to the ground. Marcus was arrested. The evidence, enough to unravel an entire web of corruption. But the thing that silenced the entire reserve wasn't Logan's testimony. It was the final clip on his camera. A full-grown lion standing guard over the man who once saved him, as if to say, "This is my justice." It didn't take long. With the video, the shipping logs, and all the documents found in that wooden hut, Marcus was arrested. The case was reopened. After 10 years in exile, Logan sat, for the first time, in the Savannah director's office. The same place where years ago he had been cast out like a nameless shadow. The false charges were dropped. His record restored. An apology was issued on paper. But Logan didn't care much for that. When the new director asked, "What do you want from us? A title? A settlement?" Logan simply replied, "I want a small wooden hut by the old hillside and the right to patrol alone." Savannah opened its arms again, but not to welcome a triumphant hero. Logan didn't return as a legend. He returned like an old gatekeeper who just wanted to sit quietly beneath the trees and listen as the forest whispered the stories that were never written down. One late afternoon, as golden sunlight poured through the clouds, Logan walked up the western hill, the same spot he had stood on so many years ago. And what he saw filled his heart with unspeakable joy. It was the same familiar silhouette, but this time it was different. Beside Zuberi stood a lioness, and trailing at their feet, 3 lion cubs.